Rain poured heavily over the quiet downtown street as a young woman stepped out of a small coffee shop, holding a worn leather bag close to her chest. She looked simple, plain clothes, no makeup, hair tied casually. To anyone watching, she appeared ordinary, almost invisible in the busy city. But behind her calm eyes was a sharp mind and a powerful secret. As she walked toward her car, flashing police lights suddenly reflected across the wet pavement, cutting through the night and drawing everyone's attention toward her. Two police officers stepped out of their patrol car, their expressions stern and suspicious. Without greeting her properly, one officer demanded to see her identification. The other circled around her vehicle as if expecting to find something illegal. People nearby slowed down, curious about the sudden confrontation. The young woman remained calm, though her heart beat steadily in her chest. She politely asked why she was being stopped, but her question was ignored, replaced with harsh instructions and impatient gestures. The taller officer accused her of matching the description of a suspect involved in a nearby theft. His tone carried more judgment than evidence. She tried explaining that she had just finished a late meeting at work, but the officers exchanged doubtful glances. One of them scoffed at her modest appearance, whispering that people like her often had something to hide. The words stung, but she held her composure, understanding that losing her temper would only worsen the situation. As the officers continued questioning her in front of the growing crowd, one demanded she step away from her car and place her hands on the hood. The humiliation was sharp and public. Phones were raised to record the scene, and murmurs spread through the bystanders. She complied quietly, though her dignity felt under attack. The officers searched her bag carelessly, pulling out legal documents and files without concern for privacy or respect. When one officer finally glanced at the documents scattered across the car hood, his expression shifted slightly. The official seal on the top file caught his eye. He paused, squinting at the bold letters printed beneath it. The young woman slowly turned her head and spoke in a steady, controlled voice. "Before you continue," she said, "you might want to read that properly." Her calm confidence contrasted sharply with the officer's earlier arrogance, signaling that something unexpected was about to unfold. The officer picked up the document with slightly trembling hands, brushing rain droplets off the surface to read it clearly. His confident posture slowly stiffened as his eyes scanned the bold heading. The seal belonged to the district attorney's office. He blinked once, then twice, as if he hoped he had misunderstood what he was reading. The younger officer leaned closer, curiosity turning into confusion. The crowd sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The young woman remained still, her hands resting calmly on the car hood, watching their expressions transform from suspicion to disbelief. "Is this some kind of joke?" the taller officer muttered, trying to recover his authority. The woman slowly straightened her posture and faced them directly. "No, officer," she replied calmly. "It's not a joke. I am the district attorney assigned to this county." Her voice carried quiet power, not arrogance, but certainty. A murmur spread through the bystanders. Phones that had been recording humiliation were now capturing embarrassment. The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances, realizing the gravity of their mistake and the public nature of their behavior. The younger officer quickly removed his hands from the scattered documents and began placing them back into her bag with visible nervousness. The taller one cleared his throat, attempting to explain that they were simply following procedure, but his earlier tone of disrespect echoed in everyone's memory. The woman listened without interrupting, her face composed yet firm. "Procedure does not include humiliation," she said quietly. The words were not shouted, yet they cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. The rain continued to fall, but now the tension in the air was heavier than the storm itself. The officer who had mocked her appearance avoided eye contact. The bystanders whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads. The woman picked up her bag herself, ensuring every document was intact. "I understand your job is difficult," she said calmly, "but assumptions can damage lives." Her measured tone reflected both professionalism and disappointment, reminding everyone present that respect should never depend on someone's appearance. The taller officer finally stepped back, offering a stiff apology. It lacked sincerity, but it was the only option left. The woman accepted it with a nod, though her eyes revealed she would not forget the incident. She informed them that she had been returning from a strategy meeting regarding misconduct cases within the department. That revelation struck harder than her title alone. The officers' faces paled as they realized the irony of the situation unfolding before them.
A sudden silence settled between them as the meaning of her last sentence fully registered. Misconduct cases within the department. The taller officer felt a chill unrelated to the rain. He glanced at his partner, who now looked visibly uncomfortable. The crowd sensed the shift again. Whispers turned into low murmurs of shock. The young district attorney stood steady, no longer appearing like an ordinary passerby, but a figure of authority wrapped in calm restraint. The balance of power had quietly reversed, and everyone present could feel it. "I assume you're aware of citizens' rights during a stop," she asked evenly, her voice controlled yet firm. The question was simple, but it carried weight. The younger officer nodded quickly, while the taller one remained silent. She continued, explaining that suspicion without proper cause often leads to unnecessary escalation. Her tone wasn't angry, it was instructional, almost like a lecture delivered in a courtroom. The irony was sharp. The officers who tried to intimidate her were now standing as if they were the ones being examined. The taller officer attempted to defend their actions, claiming the description had been vague and they were simply being cautious. But as he spoke, his earlier arrogance had vanished. The woman listened carefully, then asked a direct question about the specific evidence that justified their search. He hesitated, unable to provide a clear answer. The crowd caught the hesitation instantly. It was no longer about a routine stop. It had become a public lesson about accountability and professionalism. She took a slow breath before speaking again. "Respect should be automatic, not selective," she said. "You judged me before you knew anything about me." Her words were calm, but deeply resonant. Some bystanders nodded in agreement. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, clearly regretting the situation. The rain began to lighten, as if the storm itself was fading with the tension. Yet the emotional weight of the moment remained heavy, pressing down on the officers who now stood corrected in front of witnesses. Finally, the woman stepped away from the car hood completely, reclaiming both her posture and her dignity. She informed them that this incident would be formally reviewed, not out of revenge, but as part of ensuring proper conduct. The taller officer swallowed hard, realizing that their actions might carry professional consequences. She wasn't threatening them, she was stating a fact. Authority, when exercised properly, doesn't need volume or anger. It speaks through calm certainty. And in that quiet, powerful moment, they fully understood who she truly was. The next morning, the atmosphere inside the district attorney's office was serious yet controlled. The young woman, now dressed in a sharp professional suit, walked confidently through the hallway lined with legal staff. News of the previous night's incident had already spread. Some colleagues looked surprised, others quietly impressed by her composure under pressure. She placed her leather bag on her desk and began organizing the documents retrieved from the stop. There was no sign of anger on her face, only determination to handle the matter legally and fairly. Later that day, an internal review meeting was scheduled with senior officials from the police department. The same two officers sat at the long conference table, noticeably tense. The room felt heavier than the rainy night before. This time, she was seated at the head of the table, not as a suspect, but as the district attorney leading the discussion. She greeted everyone professionally, her tone calm yet authoritative. The shift in setting made one thing clear. This was no longer a street confrontation, it was an official evaluation. She began by presenting the facts of the incident, supported by video clips recorded by bystanders. The footage showed the dismissive tone, the public humiliation, and the unnecessary search.
There was no exaggeration, only evidence. The room remained silent as the clips played. The taller officer avoided looking at the screen while the younger one stared at the table. She paused the video and calmly asked, "Do you believe this reflects departmental standards?" Her question lingered in the air, demanding honest reflection. The police chief cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. He acknowledged that the behavior seen in the video did not represent the department's values. The officers were asked to explain themselves again, but their voices lacked confidence. What had seemed routine the night before now appeared careless and prejudiced under review. The district attorney listened carefully, ensuring the process remained respectful yet firm. She emphasized that accountability protects both citizens and officers from future conflicts and legal consequences. By the end of the meeting, corrective actions were outlined. The officers would undergo additional training focused on bias awareness and lawful search procedures. A formal warning would also be placed in their records. The district attorney made it clear that the goal was reform, not revenge. As the officers left the room, they looked humbled. The lesson extended beyond them. It reached every person in that building. Authority without respect weakens trust, but accountability restores balance.
Within days, the video of the street encounter began circulating online, sparking widespread discussion across the community. News outlets picked up the story, highlighting the irony of officers humiliating the very district attorney responsible for overseeing legal accountability. Social media debates intensified, with citizens sharing personal experiences of similar treatment. While some praised the officers for admitting their mistake, many focused on the deeper issue of assumptions based on appearance. The incident had grown far beyond one rainy night. It had become a public conversation about fairness, dignity, and professional responsibility. Reporters requested interviews, but the district attorney chose her words carefully. Standing at a press conference podium, she addressed the matter with calm clarity. She did not attack the department or embarrass the officers publicly. Instead, she spoke about systemic improvement and rebuilding trust between law enforcement and citizens. "This is not about one mistake," she explained. "It is about learning and ensuring every individual is treated with equal respect." Her measured tone strengthened her credibility even further. Behind closed doors, however, she reflected on the emotional impact of that night. The humiliation had been real. Standing in the rain, hands on her own car while strangers watched, it was a moment she would never forget. Even with authority and legal knowledge, she had felt vulnerable. That realization deepened her understanding of what ordinary citizens experience daily. It strengthened her commitment to reform. Leadership, she believed, required empathy as much as power. The younger officer requested a private meeting with her days later. He admitted that his actions had been influenced by assumptions and pressure to appear decisive. He expressed genuine regret not just for being wrong about her identity, but for how he had treated her as a person. She listened quietly, appreciating the honesty. "Growth begins with acknowledgement," she replied. It was a simple exchange, but it signaled the possibility of meaningful change. Meanwhile, new training programs were introduced within the department, emphasizing communication skills, bias awareness, and respectful procedures during public stops. Officers were reminded that every encounter represents the entire institution. The incident was now being used as a case study, not to shame, but to educate. What began as humiliation had transformed into a catalyst for improvement. The district attorney understood that true justice is not about punishment alone. It is about preventing the same mistake from happening again. Weeks passed, but the memory of that rainy night remained vivid in her mind. Every time she drove past the same street, she recalled the flashing lights and the crowd's whispers. Yet, instead of resentment, she felt a renewed sense of responsibility. The incident had strengthened her resolve to ensure justice was not selective. She reviewed pending cases involving complaints against officers with sharper focus, determined to apply the law fairly. The experience had not weakened her, it had refined her purpose.
Community leaders began inviting her to speak at local forums and town hall meetings. Residents filled the rooms, eager to hear directly from the district attorney who had turned humiliation into reform. She shared her story honestly, explaining how easily assumptions can distort judgment. Her message was clear: respect must never depend on status, clothing, or appearance. The audience responded with applause, not because she held power, but because she spoke with sincerity shaped by experience. Inside the police department, subtle changes were noticeable. Officers became more cautious in their language during public interactions. Body camera footage was reviewed more consistently, and supervisors emphasized de-escalation techniques. The taller officer, once confident and dismissive, now approached his duties with visible restraint. The embarrassment he had faced served as a constant reminder. Though pride had been wounded, professionalism gradually replaced arrogance. The lesson learned on that street continued influencing behavior long after the rain had dried. One evening, months later, the district attorney received a letter from a young woman in the community. The letter described how the public handling of the incident had restored her faith in the justice system. She wrote about feeling unseen and powerless during past encounters with authority. Reading those words, the district attorney realized that the true impact of that night extended far beyond policy changes. It had given someone hope, and that mattered more than headlines. Standing alone in her office after hours, she looked out at the city lights glowing against the dark sky. Leadership often requires facing uncomfortable moments in public view. She understood that authority is not proven by title alone, but how one responds under pressure. The humiliation she endured had become a turning point not only for the officers involved, but for the entire community. And in that quiet reflection, she knew the incident had ultimately strengthened both her character and her mission. As time moved forward, the incident gradually transformed from breaking news into institutional memory. New recruits entering the police academy were shown the footage during training sessions. Instructors paused the video at critical moments, asking trainees what could have been handled differently. The focus was not on embarrassment, but on professional growth. The district attorney supported this educational approach, believing that transparency strengthens systems. What once felt like a personal humiliation was now serving as a powerful lesson for future generations of officers. The taller officer eventually volunteered to speak during one of those training sessions. Standing before young recruits, he admitted how quickly assumptions had influenced his behavior. He explained how authority, when mixed with bias, can damage public trust. His honesty surprised many who remembered his earlier arrogance. Growth, though uncomfortable, had reshaped him. The district attorney watched quietly from the back of the room, recognizing that accountability had begun producing meaningful transformation. Meanwhile, the younger officer enrolled in additional legal education courses to better understand constitutional rights and proper procedures. He often revisited that rainy night in his thoughts, replaying each decision he had made. Instead of defensiveness, he now felt gratitude for the correction that had come early in his career. Mistakes, he realized, can either harden pride or sharpen wisdom. He chose the latter. The community's perception of the justice system slowly improved. Citizens noticed the change in tone during routine stops and public interactions. Complaints decreased, and cooperation during investigations increased. Trust, once fragile, began rebuilding brick by brick. The district attorney continued balancing firmness with fairness, ensuring that discipline and encouragement moved together. Reform was no longer a speech, it was visible action. Privately, she sometimes reflected on how differently the night could have unfolded if she had reacted with anger. Raising her voice might have escalated tension, turning a humiliating stop into a chaotic confrontation. Instead, restraint had preserved her dignity and exposed the issue clearly. She understood that true strength often appears quiet. Power exercised calmly carries greater influence than power displayed aggressively. Her leadership style gained recognition beyond the county. Invitations came from neighboring districts requesting guidance on implementing similar training reforms. She shared practical strategies, emphasizing accountability without hostility. The message remained consistent. Justice must be consistent, regardless of who stands on either side of authority. Her experience had given her credibility that no textbook could provide. One anniversary of the incident, light rain began falling again over the same street. She happened to drive by and paused briefly at a red light near the coffee shop. The memory surfaced, but this time it carried no pain. Instead, it felt like a reminder of growth, both personal and institutional. The flashing lights of that night had once symbolized humiliation. Now they represented transformation. In her office later that evening, she reviewed a final report summarizing the department's progress since the reforms. Training completion rates had improved, public feedback scores were higher, and internal reviews showed greater compliance with policy. Numbers alone did not define success, but they confirmed progress. She closed the file with quiet satisfaction. The story of that rainy night eventually became something people shared as an example of unexpected lessons. Officers were reminded not to underestimate anyone based on appearance. Citizens were reminded that calm courage can shift power dynamics, and leaders were reminded that accountability strengthens rather than weakens authority. In the end, what began as humiliation had evolved into a powerful statement about dignity and justice. The officers had only seen an ordinary girl standing in the rain. They did not know she was the district attorney. But more importantly, they had not realized that every person, ordinary or powerful, deserves equal respect. And that lesson, learned under flashing lights on a stormy night, would echo far beyond that single encounter.